For 3 weeks, Marcus Jefferson had been living a lie that was about to catch up with him in the worst possible place, a federal courtroom. He stood before Judge Sarah Williams, knowing that the next few minutes would either vindicate everything he'd sacrificed for his country or destroy the carefully constructed cover that had protected him for years. The documents in his hand contained secrets that could topple governments, expose international conspiracies, and reveal operations that officially didn't exist. But to Judge Williams, they looked like elaborate forgeries created by a desperate man trying to avoid federal charges. What neither of them knew was that this routine hearing was about to become a classified briefing that would shock everyone in that courtroom, including the federal agents who had been watching from the gallery, waiting for this exact moment. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Federal Courthouse 4B in downtown Atlanta, casting long shadows across the polished wooden floors where justice was supposed to be served without prejudice or presumption. Judge Sarah Williams adjusted her black robes as she reviewed the morning's docket, her 15 years on the federal bench having taught her to expect the unexpected, but nothing could have prepared her for what was about to unfold. Marcus Jefferson sat in the defendant section, his tall frame folded into a chair that seemed too small for someone who carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man accustomed to dangerous situations. His dark skin showed the kind of weathered look that came from years spent in places where comfort was a luxury and survival was an art form. The gray suit he wore was well-tailored but showed signs of wear, the kind of subtle details that Judge Williams had learned to notice during her years of reading people who appeared before her bench. The case file in front of her made for interesting reading. Marcus Jefferson, age 34, had been arrested 3 weeks earlier during a federal raid on what authorities believed was an identity theft ring operating out of a warehouse in South Atlanta. When agents had searched the building, they'd found sophisticated equipment for creating false documents, computers loaded with stolen personal information, and evidence of a network that had been selling fake federal credentials to the highest bidder. Marcus had been found in a back office, surrounded by documents that appeared to establish multiple identities. When questioned, he'd claimed to be a federal agent working undercover to infiltrate the ring. The problem was that no federal agency would confirm his story. The FBI said they'd never heard of him. The DEA claimed no knowledge of any Marcus Jefferson. Even Homeland Security had no record of employing anyone by that name. To the arresting officers, it looked like a textbook case of someone caught red-handed trying to create false documentation for himself, then spinning an elaborate story to avoid prosecution. The federal prosecutor handling the case had recommended the maximum sentence, calling Marcus a sophisticated criminal who shows no remorse for his crimes and continues to lie even when faced with overwhelming evidence. But as Judge Williams studied the man sitting before her, something didn't quite fit. The way he held himself, the way his eyes constantly scanned the courtroom, the way he seemed more concerned with who was watching than with his own legal predicament, it all suggested someone with training that went far beyond petty criminal activity. "Miss Jefferson," Judge Williams began, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed, "you stand accused of federal identity theft, document fraud, and conspiracy to commit fraud against the United States government. How do you plead?" Marcus stood slowly, his movements precise and controlled. "Your Honor, before I enter a plea, I need to present documentation that will clarify my status in this matter." The federal prosecutor, a sharp-dressed woman named Patricia Chen, immediately objected. "Your Honor, the defendant has already presented numerous false documents to federal agents. We ask that the court not be subjected to more elaborate forgeries." Judge Williams nodded. "Mr. Jefferson, I've reviewed the evidence in this case. The documents you presented to federal agents have been examined by experts who determined them to be sophisticated forgeries. What makes you think additional documentation will change the facts of this case?" Marcus reached into his briefcase and withdrew a sealed envelope marked with official government seals that Judge Williams didn't immediately recognize. "Your Honor, these documents are classified at levels that require special protocols for review. I'm requesting that the court contact the Justice Department's Special Operations Division for verification." The skepticism in Judge Williams's voice was unmistakable. "Mr. Jefferson, I've been on this bench for 15 years. I've seen every kind of con game, every type of elaborate deception that defendants think will get them out of federal charges. What you're describing sounds like the fantasy of someone who's watched too many movies. Marcus's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes hardened. Your Honor, I understand your skepticism, but I'm asking you to make one phone call before you dismiss what I'm telling you as fantasy. Patricia Chen stood again. Your Honor, this is exactly the kind of delay tactic that sophisticated criminals use to waste the court's time. The defendant is asking us to participate in his elaborate deception, but Judge Williams had noticed something that made her pause. In the gallery behind the defendant, 3 men in dark suits had been sitting quietly since the hearing began. They weren't taking notes, weren't conferring with anyone, just watching. And when Marcus mentioned the Justice Department's Special Operations Division, she saw one of them reach for his phone. Miss Jefferson. Judge Williams said carefully, "You're asking me to believe that you're some kind of federal agent working undercover, but that no federal agency will confirm your employment. That's a rather convenient story for someone caught with forged federal documents." Your Honor, Marcus replied, his voice steady despite the weight of what he was about to reveal. I'm not asking you to believe anything. I'm asking you to verify what I'm telling you through proper channels. The reason no agency will confirm my employment is because my cover required complete deniability. As far as official records are concerned, Marcus Jefferson doesn't exist as a federal employee. Judge Williams leaned forward, her interest piqued despite her skepticism. Then how exactly am I supposed to verify your claims? Marcus opened the sealed envelope and withdrew a single document. This contains a contact protocol that will connect you directly with Deputy Director Rachel Morrison at the Justice Department. She's one of only 7 people in the federal government who can confirm my status. The prosecutor laughed. Your Honor, now he's claiming to have direct access to Justice Department leadership. This is getting more ridiculous by the minute. But Judge Williams was studying Marcus's face, looking for signs of deception, for the tells that usually gave away people who were lying under oath. What she saw instead was the steady confidence of someone who knew exactly what would happen when that phone call was made. Miss Jefferson, she said slowly, if I make this call and it turns out you're wasting this court's time with elaborate fiction, I'm going to throw the book at you. Do you understand that? Yes, Your Honor, I understand completely. What Judge Williams didn't know was that the 3 men in the gallery had already placed their own calls, and that in a secure conference room in Washington, D.C., people with security clearances, higher than anyone in that courtroom, were having urgent conversations about how to handle a situation that had just gone from routine to classified. Judge Williams looked at the document Marcus had handed her. The letterhead was from an office she'd never heard of, with contact information that looked official but could easily have been fabricated. The smart thing would be to dismiss this as an elaborate con game and proceed with sentence. But something about Marcus's demeanor, about the way those men in the gallery were now paying very close attention, made her hesitate. Bailiff, she said finally, I'm calling a 30-minute recess. Mr. Jefferson, you'll remain in custody while I verify your claims. Marcus nodded. Thank you, Your Honor. That's all I ask. As the courtroom emptied, Judge Williams retreated to her chambers with the document Marcus had provided. The phone number looked legitimate, with a Washington, D.C. area code and an extension that suggested a high-level government office. But appearances could be deceiving, especially when dealing with sophisticated criminals who'd had time to plan their deceptions. She dialed the number, expecting to reach a disconnected line or an accomplice playing along with Marcus's scheme. Deputy Director Morrison's office, the crisp voice of what sounded like a government secretary. This is Federal Judge Sarah Williams, in Atlanta. I need to speak with Deputy Director Morrison about a matter involving someone named Marcus Jefferson. There was a pause that seemed to last forever. Then, please hold, Your Honor. I'm transferring you immediately. The voice that came on the line 30 seconds later belonged to a woman who sounded like she was accustomed to handling crises at the highest levels of government. Judge Williams, this is Deputy Director Rachel Morrison. I understand you have Marcus Jefferson in your courtroom. Judge Williams felt her skepticism begin to waver. Deputy Director, I have a defendant who claims to be a federal agent, but no agency will confirm his employment. He says you can verify his status. Judge Williams, what I'm about to tell you is classified, and I need your assurance that this conversation will remain confidential, pending further instruction from the Justice Department. The seriousness in Morrison's voice made Judge Williams sit up straighter. You have my assurance, Deputy Director. But what Judge Williams was about to learn would shatter every assumption she'd made about the man standing in her courtroom and expose a truth so dangerous that it had been hidden at the highest levels of government for years. Judge Williams, Deputy Director Morrison continued, her voice carrying the weight of someone delivering information that could change lives. The man you know as Marcus Jefferson is actually Special Agent Marcus Thompson, one of our most valuable deep cover operatives. For the past 5 years he's been working on Operation Silent Shield, an investigation into international arms trafficking that has taken him into some of the most dangerous criminal organizations in the world. Judge Williams felt the room seem to spin around her. Are you telling me that he's actually a federal agent? I'm telling you that Agent Thompson has spent 5 years building a cover identity so deep that it required us to create false criminal records, fake documentation, and elaborate backstories that would hold up under the most intensive scrutiny. The identity theft ring he was found in wasn't something he was participating in. It was something he'd spent months infiltrating to gather evidence on a network that's been supplying weapons to terrorist organizations. The implications hit Judge Williams like a physical blow. Then the documents he was found with were part of his cover. Agent Thompson has been operating under so many layers of false identity that even we sometimes have trouble keeping track of which Marcus Jefferson is the real one and which ones are constructed for operational purposes. Judge Williams stared at the phone, trying to process what she was hearing. But why wasn't this information provided when he was arrested? Because blowing his cover would have endangered not just Agent Thompson, but every person who's helped him gather intelligence over the past 5 years. We had hoped to extract him from the situation quietly, but the arrest happened too quickly for us to intervene without exposing the operation. So you were willing to let him go to federal prison to protect his cover. There was a long pause before Morrison answered. Judge Williams, Agent Thompson volunteered for this assignment knowing that maintaining his cover might require him to face prosecution. He's been prepared for this possibility since the day he went undercover. Judge Williams thought about Marcus sitting in her courtroom, facing federal charges that could send him to prison for decades, knowing that he couldn't defend himself without exposing an operation that had taken years to develop. What do you need from me, Deputy Director? We need you to dismiss all charges against Agent Thompson and release him immediately. Within the hour, we'll be providing you with documentation that will explain the national security implications of this case. But that documentation will be classified and cannot be part of the public record. Judge Williams felt the weight of what she was being asked to do. You're asking me to dismiss federal charges based on classified information that I can't share with anyone. I'm asking you to trust that Agent Thompson's work has prevented weapons shipments that could have been used in terrorist attacks on American soil. I'm asking you to believe that the man in your courtroom has risked everything to serve his country, and that prosecuting him would be a miscarriage of justice on a scale that would haunt everyone involved. As Judge Williams hung up the phone, she realized that nothing about this case was what it had seemed. The man she'd assumed was a sophisticated criminal was actually a federal agent who'd been living in the shadows for years, sacrificing his identity and his safety to protect people who would never know his name. When she returned to the courtroom 20 minutes later, the atmosphere had changed completely. The 3 men in dark suits were no longer sitting passively in the gallery. They were standing near the prosecutor's table, having quiet but intense conversations with Patricia Chen, who looked like someone who'd just been told that everything she thought she knew about a case was wrong. Marcus Jefferson, Agent Marcus Thompson, stood as Judge Williams entered, his expression unchanged but his posture suggesting someone who knew that the charade was finally over. Mr. Jefferson, Judge Williams began, then caught herself. Agent Thompson. The use of his real title caused a visible shift in Marcus's demeanor. For the first time since entering the courtroom, he looked like what he actually was, a federal agent who'd spent years in deep cover, living a lie to serve his country. Your Honor, the prosecutor said, standing quickly, I've just been informed by Justice Department officials that this case involves classified national security matters that cannot be adjudicated in open court. Judge Williams nodded. Agent Thompson, I've been made aware of the true nature of your situation. Before I dismiss these charges, is there anything you'd like to say to this court? Marcus? Agent Thompson was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. Your Honor, I've spent 5 years living as someone I'm not, making choices that went against everything I was taught about right and wrong, all in service to operations that most people will never know existed. I've done things that would horrify the people I was trying to protect, and I've sacrificed relationships, opportunities, and pieces of myself that I'll never get back. His voice grew stronger as he continued, but I've also helped prevent weapons shipments that would have killed innocent people. I've gathered intelligence that's been used to stop terrorist attacks. I've identified networks that were planning to harm Americans, and I've done work that I believe has made this country safer. Judge Williams found herself moved by the quiet dignity in Agent Thompson's voice. Agent Thompson, this court apologizes for the ordeal you've endured in maintaining your cover. All charges against you are hereby dismissed. As Marcus walked out of the courtroom, no longer Marcus Jefferson, the suspected criminal, but Agent Marcus Thompson, federal operative, Judge Williams realized she'd just been part of something that would never make the news, never be discussed in legal journals, never be used as precedent in future cases. But what happened next would prove that some secrets are too important to stay buried, and that the truth about Agent Thompson's work was about to have consequences that no one in that courtroom could have anticipated. 3 hours after the charges were dismissed, Agent Thompson sat in a secure briefing room in the federal building, facing people whose names he'd known for years but whose faces he was seeing for the first time. Deputy Director Morrison was there, along with the operational commanders who'd been running Silent Shield from Washington. Marcus. Morrison began, using his real name for the first time in years. We need to talk about what happens next. Agent Thompson had been expecting this conversation. My cover's blown. The operation's compromised. I understand. It's more complicated than that, Morrison said, sliding a file across the table. The intelligence you gathered in the past 5 years has led to something bigger than we originally anticipated. We've identified a network that goes far beyond arms trafficking. We're looking at connections to human trafficking, drug smuggling, and terrorist financing that reaches into governments around the world. Agent Thompson opened the file and found photographs, documents, and evidence that represented years of careful work building cases against people who thought they were untouchable. The question, Morrison continued, is whether you're willing to continue this work under a new identity, with a new cover, in a new location, or whether 5 years underground is enough for one person to sacrifice. Agent Thompson studied the faces in the photographs, men and women who used money and violence to tow lives, who profited from human suffering, who considered themselves above the law because they'd never been held accountable for their actions. What would the new assignment involve? International work. Europe. Probably. Another deep cover identity that would take years to establish, and this time, we wouldn't be able to extract you if things went wrong. You'd be completely on your own. Agent Thompson thought about the life he'd given up 5 years earlier, about the relationships he'd sacrificed, about the person he'd been before Marcus Jefferson had taken over his identity. Then he thought about the people in those photographs, about the lives that would be destroyed if their networks continued to operate. When do I start? 6 months later, a man named David Richardson arrived in Berlin, carrying credentials that identified him as a freelance security consultant with experience in Eastern European markets. He had no connection to Marcus Jefferson or Marcus Thompson. His background was clean, his references were impeccable, and his cover story would hold up under the most intensive scrutiny. But in a secure facility outside Washington, D.C., Deputy Director Morrison kept a file that told a different story. A story about a federal agent who'd sacrificed his identity not once but twice to serve his country. A story about operations that would never be declassified, evidence that would never see a courtroom, and victories that would never be celebrated. And in Federal Courthouse 4B in Atlanta, Judge Sarah Williams sometimes thought about the morning when everything she thought she knew about justice, identity, and service had been turned upside down by a man who'd been willing to face federal prosecution rather than compromise an operation that was saving lives. The courtroom had returned to its normal routine of drug cases, tax evasion, and white-collar crime, but Judge Williams never forgot the lesson she'd learned that day. That sometimes the most unbelievable stories are the only ones that are completely true, and that the people who serve their country at the highest levels often do so in shadows, without recognition, without praise, and without anyone ever knowing their real names. Because heroism isn't always about standing in the light and being celebrated. Sometimes it's about living in darkness for years, sacrificing everything you are to become someone you're not, all in service to people who will never know what you've done for them. And sometimes, justice isn't about following the letter of the law. Sometimes it's about understanding that some truths are bigger than the courtrooms where they're revealed, and some people serve their country in ways that can never be fully acknowledged or completely understood.